ancient Sanskrit texts dating back as far as 6000 BC.
Wow, 6000 BC? Really? In reality, the oldest of these texts would be the Vedas, which date to between 500 and 1500 BC. Ancient Aliens just adds another 5,000 years, as if no one would notice. They're actually even contradicting themselves with this date, because in another episode they correctly state that the oldest writings in the world are the Sumerian tablets, the oldest of which date to about 4000 BC. So why are they now saying that there are some writings 2,000 years older than the oldest writings? I don't think anyone knows.
Describe in varying but vivid detail flying machines called Vimanas.
Vimanas are aeroplanes, and they are powered by some jet engines. This seems to be true because all the description of the flight behavior, elephants ran away in panic. Grass was thrown out because there was a lot of pressure from behind those Vimanas. So that we can say this is a description of the spaceship.
The word Vimana literally means having been measured out, and it was related to the king's palaces, and was referring to their intricate construction. Later on, as a result, the word became synonymous with palaces in general, and because of that, it was used to refer to the palaces of the gods as well. And yes, these palaces of the gods were in the heavens, and they could fly. But as we look into this, it will be clear that some of the Vimanas of the gods really were huge palaces, with gardens and terraces and golden staircases. Then, because the palaces of the gods flew, the word gradually became used for anything that could fly, either in mythology or in reality. So understanding the palace concept in the development of the word Vimana is helpful in understanding what we will be looking at. But before we look into the real descriptions of Vimanas in the Vedic texts, we must first examine a fake text, because almost everything that Ancient Aliens says about Vimanas comes from a totally bogus text called the Vimanaka Shastra.
Although mainstream historians believe the Vimana texts are myths, many of the documents contain passages that seem to describe modern machinery and technology.
The Vimanaka Shastra goes into metals that are used in these craft. It talks about electricity and power sources. It talks about the pilots and the clothing they have to wear. It talks about the food that they eat. It talks even about the weapons that are kept on these airships.
The flight manuals of the Vimanas are quite similar to the flight manuals you find in the modern passenger flight business, or when you go to the military jet engines. Of course, they have also flight manuals because it's necessary for a pilot to get knowledge about his plane he wanted to fly with.
The Vimanaka Shastra is not an actual ancient text. It was channeled or dictated to the author from the spirit world in 1918. The spirit who supposedly dictated the text claimed to be an ancient seer named Bharadvata, who is prominent in some ancient writings, so I guess that's what's supposed to give this text credibility. That is, the idea that the ghost of someone ancient supposedly dictated it. But they're not even sure that version of the story is true, because the first mention of any of this is in 1952 by the guy who supposedly found and translated the text from 1918. So as far as anyone knows, he could have made the whole channeled by a famous ghost story up in 1952. The text itself reads like a technical manual, describing the details of how Vimanas operated. It includes the description of what must have sounded like a really technical idea in 1918 or 1952 called a mercury vortex engine. Ancient Aliens spends a huge amount of time talking about this idea.
The Vimana Shastra, or science of aeronautics, indicates Vimanas used a propulsion system based on a combination of gyroscopes, electricity, and mercury. Is this possible?
Mercury is an unusual element. Mercury is metal, it's also a liquid, and is a conductor of electricity.
The Vimana Shastra suggests Vimanas were powered by several gyroscopes, placed inside a sealed liquid mercury vortex.
One of the texts talks about Mercury rotating and driving some sort of a powerful wind or a windmill effect. That might be some sort of what we call a flywheel energy storage, where you have a spinning disk and then you extract energy from it slowly. That would be the mercury. And then that could be used to drive some sort of a propeller or what we call a ducted fan.
Some of the other things that this text describes are equally scientific sounding. It even includes very technical drawings of the things that it's talking about. But when you look closer at all this, it becomes obvious that it is physically impossible for any of these craft to get off the ground. In fact, 20 years later, in 1974, a study was done on the texts and the drawings by the Aeronautical and Mechanical Institute of Science in Bangalore, India. I will quote Will Hunt, an American freelance writer based in India, for a description of how that study came out. Quote, "As thoroughly as it had been written, the committee just as thoroughly dismantled the study in an essay called A Critical Study of the Work of Vimana Shastra. They question whether the author, whoever that may have been, had any grasp of basic physics, chemistry, and electricity, not to mention the, quote, disciplines of aeronautics, aerodynamics, aeronautical structures, propulsive devices, materials, and metallurgy. Their conclusion, quote, none of the planes has properties or capabilities of being flown. The geometries are unimaginably horrendous from the point of view of flying, and the principles of propulsion make them resist rather than assist flying." Another writer, J.B. Hare, writing for the Sacred Text Archive, said the following of the craft in the Vimana Shastra, quote, "They are absurdly non-aerodynamic, brutalist wedding cakes, with minarets, huge ornithopter wings, and dinky propellers." I have a feeling that even though 90% of the information that Ancient Aliens presents on Vimanas comes from this text, they realize that it has been thoroughly discredited. And so, in an odd twist, after spending 5 minutes on how great the idea of a mercury vortex engine would be, they then let everyone know that the idea wouldn't actually work. They stop short, however, of saying that there's anything wrong with this text. They just say that there may have been a problem with the translation of a word or two.
Flywheel energy storage systems, however, tend to lose power quickly. To navigate across space, its size would have to be enormous.
It's not at all clear that this would be a practical device. Now, maybe the people were trying to describe something that kind of looked like this to them. It might not have actually been mercury, it might have been some other liquid metal.
The mercury vortex engine is perhaps a failure in the translation, because the vortex is not a material quite suitable to a jet engine.
So let's move on to the mentions of Vimanas in the actual ancient Vedic texts. So, as I've already mentioned, the word Vimana came to mean palace, and when it was the palace of a god, it was usually capable of flying around. When we look at the development of Vimanas chronologically, the mystery surrounding them vanishes. First of all, they were not even mentioned in the earlier texts, and when they finally were mentioned, the next 1,000 years of their being mentioned always included them having wheels and being drawn by horses. Not exactly a mercury vortex engine. Then, around 500 BC, the chariots lose their horses and are depicted as flying on their own. Jason Colavito says the following about the first mentions of Vimanas without horses. Quote, "The very first of these is the flying chariot of the earthly king Ravana, called Pushpaka. By the time of the Mahabharata, circa 400 BCE, these flying chariots had grown in size. One was now described as 12 cubits in circumference, but they never lost their large wheels that marked them as derived from earthly, horse-drawn chariots." It's also interesting to see that ancient astronaut theorists have to distort the actual descriptions of Vimanas in the Vedic texts in order to make them sound like UFOs. For example, the following is a quote from David Childress's book, where he's supposed to be quoting a description of a Vimana from an ancient text. We'll read what he tells his readers what it says, and then we will read the actual ancient text and note the differences. First, let's hear Childress's version. Quote, "When morning dawned, Rama, taking the celestial car Pushpaka had sent to him by Vipishan, stood ready to depart. Self-propelled was that car. It was large and finely painted. It had 2 stories and many chambers with windows, and was draped with flags and banners. It gave forth a melodious sound as it coursed along its airy way." And now, here's what the actual Ramayana says. Quote, "And the mighty monkey ascended the splendid car Pushpaka, containing figures of wolves, made of Kartswara and Hiranya, graced with ranges of goodly pillars, as if blazing in splendor throughout, garnished with narrow secret rooms and saloons, piercing the heavens and resembling Meru or Mandara, and like unto the flaming sun, skillfully reared by Vikwakarma, with golden staircases and graceful and grand raised seats, rows of golden and crystal windows, and daises composed of sapphires, emeralds, and other superb gems, embellished with noble vidrumas, costly stones, and round pearls, and also with plastered terraces, pasted with red sandal, like unto gold, and furnished with a sacred aroma, and resembling the sun new risen." Colavito says of this, quote, "Elsewhere it is described as being filled with fruit trees, and sometimes is drawn by geese. Do you know many UFOs with plastered terraces and red paint?" In summary, most of what Ancient Aliens uses on this point is from a bogus 20th century channeled text, which they dishonestly present as an ancient text. And even the real descriptions of Vimanas get some tweaking by them in order to make it sound like a UFO. The development of the idea of Vimanas in Hindu mythology can be traced easily, and it loses all of its intrigue for the ancient astronaut theorists when you do that.